I'm Lisa Gable. I am the CEO of FAIR, Food Allergy Research and Education. And today we're going to talk about how you can speak with facts, not your own personal opinions, but making sure that you listen to the voice of those people that you serve.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, he's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Do you truly have what it takes to change the course when things are going south? Well, stay tuned, because that's exactly where we're going on today's show. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I am the Dragonist, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. To find out more about me, you can simply go to dovbaron.com. I want to remind you that this episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, which is Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how can we bring people together who seem completely different and maybe even completely disagree? This is exactly what your heart and your mind and your soul have been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some real and oftentimes very intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. I'm talking about astronauts, neuroscientists, philosophers, holy people, quantum physicists, skeptics, entrepreneurs, Grammy Award-winning entertainers, and some folks you might completely disagree with who you would find truly fascinating. Simply go over to dovbaron.com and find out how you can sink your teeth into the next episode of Curiosity Bites. As always, you can find us for either of those podcasts on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. And remember, we always need your help in staying relevant, so please get over there, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. We really appreciate it. And if you're a regular listener, a big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. And we are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. You can also catch us on Google, Home, or Alexa by simply saying play Dov Baron podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. We have spoken many times about the contemporary importance of not just being resilient, but being highly agile. Many companies have found themselves on the brink for whatever reasons and needing leaders who are truly have what it takes to change the course, as I said, when things are going south. However, you may be asking yourself, what does it really take? Well, stay tuned, because that's exactly where we're going. You see, my guest on this episode is an international powerhouse leader, Lisa Gable. Now, her passion, expertise, and fearless work style have propelled her to achieve titles such as CEO, U.S. Ambassador, UN Delegate, Chairman of the Board of Advisors to Presidents, Governors, CEOs of Fortune 500 and global and companies that are worldwide. Today, she is the CEO of FAIR, the world's largest nonprofit organization dedicated to food allergy awareness, education, research, and advocacy. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome advisor to 4 past presidents, the CEO of FAIR, Lisa Gable. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. That was the best welcome I've ever gotten.
Well, I know you've had some pretty good welcomes, so I will take that. Thank you. I want to start where I always like to start, which is this. As an international leader, you know, you've been a CEO, U.S. ambassador, delegate, and you've advised 4 presidents and governors and CEOs and all these people. I would like you to tell us from your diagnostics where do you see the state of leadership today? And I'm not just talking political, although it could be that, but just generally, what do you see as the state of leadership?
Well, I'm actually always pretty positive about things. And as you know, we've gone through this incredible inflection point. But I think
Hmm.
there's so many opportunities that have come out of it. And what we've seen is we've seen leaders step forward in ways that none of us ever imagined. I mean, if
Mm.
we look at Operation Warp Speed, the way in which the drug companies were able to collaborate on pre-competitive data, the way that they were sharing data, the way that AI came into the mix in order to really accelerate a process that normally takes many, many years. It's incredible. It's incredible
Hmm.
leadership that we've seen, the way that we've seen grocery stores and retailers step forward. Because the reality is, yes, there have been moments where there are limitations for food, and we have a number of people right now that are financially struggling. But at the same time, we've still been able to continue to have a sustainable food supply in the United States. And that did not happen without a great deal of leadership.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's important to focus on what has been good. I mean, it's very easy to focus on what has been devastating, but I mean, I do believe that the whole pandemic period, when we look back, we will see it's been a period of incredible innovation because we don't innovate when things are good. When things are good, we're kind of like, yeah, we should innovate. Yeah, but let's have a picnic first. But when it's like, oh my God, the supply chain's gone out of the window, how do we innovate? Then you kind of get your stuff together. So thank you for that. I appreciate you pointing that out. Um, in this time of influence, where everybody likes to call themselves an influencer, one of the questions I love to ask my leaders at the beginning of a conversation is this: who is someone that we might know, might not even consider, who has been a really major influence on you and your leadership, and why?
Well, I've been very fortunate in that when I was very young, I was in my early 20s working at the White House. I had the opportunity to recruit a woman by the name of Barbara Barrett, who's currently Secretary of the Air Force, to be a Deputy Administrator of the FAA. And my boss, who was head of presidential personnel at the time, Bob Tuttle, was running 2 hours late. So here I am. I'm 22 years old. I'm working at the White House. I'm going to graduate school at nighttime. And Barbara and I are downstairs in the basement of the White House waiting and waiting and waiting for Bob. So she's a wonderful person. If anyone's met her on the show, they know that she's very gregarious and very interested in people. So she asked me about everything in my life. And at the end of the conversation, we were getting into my master's thesis. We've been there for 2 hours. And my
Sure.
master's thesis was about dual use products, semiconductors and supercomputers, and what the Chinese were doing with them both militarily as well as in the business sector. So she goes, oh, you really sometime need to meet my husband, Craig Barrett. He's senior vice president of this company. It's called Intel Corporation. At that time, it was about a $1.5 billion, $1.2 billion company. And I remembered that conversation. And she continued to be a great friend and a mentor throughout the Reagan administration. At the end of it, I called her up and I said, can I meet that husband of yours? And I was fortunate enough that he hired me, brought me out to Phoenix, Arizona, the Chandler, Arizona area, where he was head of manufacturing at the time, and that couple really invested in me. Craig taught me about statistical process control. He taught me how to use manufacturing processes to solve complex problems in business as well as in government. Barbara later in my life would allow me to replace her on boards. And so if she was going off a board for a company or a not-for-profit or a business school in one case, she would nominate me to fill her place. And so I'm incredibly grateful that I had two such amazing people that taught me so much in my 20s and who really laid the groundwork for much of the success that I've had.
When you talk about her and she's set up for the next administration. I mean, this is a person who's been around a while. Obviously, knows how to play at the upper end. When you think about her, what is, as a person, what is it about her that has impacted you and you've really sort of taken on, if you will?
It's been her generosity and her generosity within her relationships. And that's something that I've really tried to emulate in everything that I've done, which is be generous with your relationships. There's no
Hmm.
reason you should be holding them tight. In fact, we're all much better if we're running up those hills together. And so having someone who not only was generous in their relationships, but was really considerate of thinking through with me, what are my paths to success? It's all about credentialing. And so that was the other thing I also learned from her is how do you credential people? I was luckily in presidential personnel, so I saw how people were credentialed to become cabinet members or, an
Right.
ambassador. But having someone who you could sit there and go, okay, I've seen this on someone else's resume. What do I need to do? What actions do I need to take? How do I need to present myself? And so having that hands-on mentoring as well as opening those doors I can't say enough about the impact that it had.
It's a very interesting piece right there. I know we could actually spend an entire show on that, which is this and this. I've often had these conversations with the leaders I work with around this idea of nepotism, which of course goes back to the time of the original popes. And the nepotism was the nephew, who was not really a nephew, who was put into power. But it's interesting that when we think of nepotism now, it's about putting a family member in. But all sort of giving somebody a hand up is some form of nepotism. It's that you see something in somebody, you want to bring them forward. Hopefully, you're seeing something good and valuable and worthy of putting them in that position. But it's an interesting tie to what you were saying there, because for me, I've said for years that where I grew up and when I grew up very poor, and I had these horrible ideas about people who were wealthy and powerful that I've managed to dismantle. But in that process, I was told that they were greedy and hoarded and all those kinds of things. And what I found over the years is the people who are genuinely enormously successful are the most generous people I've ever met. They're not the ones who then in fact it's people sort of in the middle that get stuck. The most successful people are incredibly generous, incredibly giving, and want to help you up. So that's a really good lesson for our listeners to go, am I hoarding? Am I protecting? Or am I being generous? Because it's a statement of your leadership maturity if you can have that generosity. So that's a great lesson from her to you and you to us. So thank you.
It's interesting because, like I said, I try to replicate it. And I think, one of the things when we talk about diversity and equity is it's not just mentoring someone on how to write their resume, how to
No.
interview for a job. You've got to make commitments to people. And as Barbara did with me through multiple stages of my career, I'm doing the same thing. It's a daisy chain, right?
Yep.
I have women that I've now been helping who, I met when they were in their 20s, they're now in their 40s. I've recently been helping a young Black woman who graduated from Babson and who I introduced her to. I've introduced her to all the women that I helped. Well, they're all
Right.
in great positions of power right now. Some are in high tech, some are in business, some are in government. And of course they're excited because we all fundamentally share the same commitment to not only helping someone with the first stage, but it's really helping them with the second, third, and fourth stage that's going to enable women, it's going to enable Black leaders to have access to positions of power. And that's what we're talking about right now is breaking through that glass ceiling and ensuring that we have diverse inputs in everything when we're making decisions.
Well, I think we're all becoming very aware that we need diversity in leadership. And I think we've all been aware for a long time that we need women in leadership. God, I'm praying for more of that. But at the same time, women still are banging up against that glass ceiling. And I think it's wonderful that you and people like Barbara have reached down to pull up others, and are doing that. Again, I think the generosity is a vitally important part of real leadership, not the leadership we're told, but real leadership. And certainly doing it for those people who might not get that hand up normally. So again, thank you for that. I want to come back to something that was in your intro there. You have advised 4 U.S. presidents. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's a good context for people. Because I believe it's been different parties. I believe it's been people that we wouldn't necessarily put together, and you've been there as an advisor. Talk to us a little bit about that, if you could, please.
Well, one thing within the US government is we have what are called presidential appointments. Some are presidential appointments that the president makes directly, some are presidential appointments with Senate confirmation. But once you achieve that level, what you are doing is that you're influencing a key policy area that's important to that president.
Right.
And with that, I've been able to do this type of activity under, as you said, Republicans and Democrats. To one degree, I've had what are called midnight appointments. And so I actually was appointed by George H.W. Bush, but sworn in under Bill Clinton. And the issue we were dealing with at that point in time was tailhook. As some of your listeners may be old enough to remember, tailhook was the largest, most impactful sexual harassment situation in the U.S. military. It really roiled the military. And we had a mechanism by which there was an advisory board that was advising the Secretary of Defense, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, ultimately the president, on how we resolved those issues. And we came from different political backgrounds, right? We had a group of us that were technically Bush 41 appointees. We were sworn in under Clinton. We were working with Clinton appointees. And so we had to create processes forward. And I think in each case, every single administration I've worked with, and I had the opportunity to work very closely with the Obama administration, with Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign, is that it really does require leaving your ego at the door, identifying the places where you can work together, be very clear and transparent. This is what I agree with. This is what I don't agree with. And then setting forward a process that could move institutionally the government forward and the administration forward in resolving a problem. And what I've discovered in doing that is that people with that level of commitment, people say bipartisanship is dead. I think people would be surprised how many of us have served in those roles where at our level, it's really bringing in the bipartisanship that's required. There's a lot of noise. But there's actually been a lot of bipartisanship activity over all of the administrations with whom I've worked.
Do you think that, so let's just address that for a minute. Because obviously the last administration has been very different politically on all kinds of levels. Whether you agree or disagree, it doesn't matter. But do you've still got your feelers in all those worlds. Do you see that there's still bipartisanship? And we know there's a lot of noise about the partisanship, but is it still, are we sort of distracted and not seeing that it is really there?
I'd say it's twofold. One is I've never in my lifetime, and I don't think any of us have in this country, seen such a level of acrimonious relationships that are playing out online. And in large part, I do believe that the digital environment elevates and accelerates those disagreements.
Sure,
however, but when you get professionals in a room and those professionals are talking about common goals, I call it my 60-40 rule. When I worked for Ronald Reagan, it was the 80-20% rule, which is if you agree with someone 80% of the time, you can put aside the 20%, you can do business. Well, let's just say that over the last 15 years, we've had to expand that notion.
Exactly.
And so I expanded it to the 60-40 rule. I was representing 16 food and beverage CEOs during the Obama administration. And the Obama administration, when it originally came in, had very strong opinions about regulation and tax related to food and beverage. And this was all playing out within the conversations around obesity. So I put into play the 60-40 rule. And what that is that if you can identify 60% of where you can work together, you literally write it down. And then you are extremely transparent about the 40%. You respect the other person when they articulate, I can be with you here, I just can't go on this place. And then you take that 40% and you put it aside. Right. And you have an opportunity to work on the 60%. Well, these are big programs. You can move a lot forward with 60%. You can move the dial forward. And so I do know that to this date, I still have never had a situation that I couldn't find a place where we can move something forward together.
That's so good. Because I think that so many people think that, it's black or white absolutes, and it's so not. And I brought up a reference earlier this year where AOC and Ted Cruz worked on a project together, and like I can't think of two people who might seem different than each other who came together and worked a bill through together. That was inspiring to me when I look at this polarized media influence about who we are. And I don't know that that's ever true. So thank you for that.
Well, and I
Uh,
should tell you that my
yeah.
organization just had a bill that was passed in the House and the Senate in 9 months. That never happens. It normally takes 4 Congresses for something to get through. And I think one reason is we called it the skinny bill. I literally sat with my staff. I'm like, oh no, Republicans aren't going to like that. Take that out. Oh no, the Democrats aren't going to like that. Take it out. They're like, Lisa, there are only 3 things left in the bill. I go, well, what are the 3 most important things to you that we need to resolve right now for the food allergy community? And he's like, 1, 2, 3. I go, well, those are the 3 things in the bill. And we've had 97 co-sponsors in the House, Democrats and Republicans. We literally had the bill brought forward by both Democrats and Republicans on March 12th, and they passed the bill on December 7th, I believe it was. That never happens. That just doesn't happen. So sometimes, yeah, you have to be smart about it. You got to take out the stuff and acknowledge the fact that the other side's not going to like it. But if your goal is to accomplish the objective, then just focus on job 1, 2, and 3. And that's what we did.
So when you say the skinny bill, was that because it was narrowed down to those 3 things?
Mm-hmm. It was so skinny. It was the skinniest bill. It was, you hear about ACA. I think when the Affordable Care Act was 1,600 pages or something. Mine was about 3 pages.
But that for me is a very interesting thing because I'm very political and I'm observing politics every single day and commenting on it. And one of the things that I've noticed, I've even made some comments about, is the challenge with being in either the Senate or Congress is you spend a lot of time raising money, and you don't get time to do the work you actually want to do for your constituents. And the interesting thing about it is that you're also supposed to read bills and pass bills. And I've seen some of these bills that are 800 pages long with side notes written in the margins that are barely readable. And you're given that 2 days before, unless you were a super speed reader and you can interpret the handwritten language on the side, you're dead in the water. It's so difficult to do that. So I can imagine that showing up with a 3-page synopsis of, listen, this is what it is. Oh, okay, I can read that at lunch.
And we could explain it, right? You could have a meeting with me, and in 90 seconds, I could tell you what the bill was. I could tell you why it was important, and I could tell you why it was inhibiting innovation. And also, in our case, we were trying to get sesame added as the 9th allergen. 1.5 million people have anaphylaxis from sesame. It's currently not on labels. And so being able to talk about, being able to articulate situations where people had accidentally ingested the food, ended up in the emergency room, ended up in ICU. That's a quick explanation. And so by focusing people on life and death, and then inhibitors to innovation, and we really narrowed it down. These are the 2 roadblocks we keep running into. We got everybody on board.
Fantastic. Now I do want to talk about FAIR and what you're doing with FAIR and all those, but one of the things I would love to do with you, because I think it's going to be very interesting for our listeners, is that we've talked about this very illustrious career you've had, advisor to presidents, getting bills through, being a CEO, all those things. But talk to us a little bit about the little you, as in what were you like as a kid? How did you grow up? And just give us a little bit of background, because I think that might be an interesting insight for people.
Well, I was a very gregarious child. So I was the person that always wanted to go with my parents to whatever event was happening to make sure I met everyone in the room. But I was also fascinated by military history. And as a little girl, as I tell people, I was very prissy. So I had white go-go boots that were never, ever, ever dirty, that were in the one corner of the room. But my bed, my sheets on my bed, my cover, my window coverings, they were all Revolutionary War military things. They were guns, they were cannons, they were, and I used to beg my father to take me to see different battlegrounds. And so it was Manassas, or it might be Gettysburg or Appomattox. And so I really developed quite a fascination for military strategy, which would always throw people because I actually tried to get into the US Navy and I didn't pass the physical. I weighed about 99 pounds. It turned out that I had an issue with my eyesight that was just never going to allow me to get into the intelligence unit that I was targeting. But I maintained that interest. And so it was something where, as a little kid, my interest was well defined. My mother, I'm 56 years old. My mother would sit there and go, "Can you turn this into a career?"
Yeah.
And it ended up actually when I worked at the Pentagon that they called me Tinkerbell because I was 21 years old. I was the youngest political appointee and I weighed 99 pounds dripping wet.
Oh my God.
But I was fascinated, and my fascination did come about because I begged my father to just take me to every historical site. I really dug into what happened with the battles. We watched, that was when you didn't have YouTube and all these other things. So Sunday afternoons, you may remember that they would always play those war movies. And so my dad and I would sit there and watch all those war movies together.
It's always an interesting question for me with leaders because there's usually some weird catalyst gone on in their childhood. Like for me, when I was a kid, I can remember my mates watching cartoons and things like that on telly. And I clearly remember my mom coming in several times on a sunny Sunday. I wouldn't be outside, although I would go out a lot, but I might be home, but I'd be watching a documentary, and it didn't matter what it was on. It was on the making of something, some machinery. It was on a battle. It was on Shakespeare. It was on, a biography. It was like, I had this insatiable learning and hated school. So I hated school, but I loved learning. Right. So it was fascinating for me, but there's always that piece in these people like yourself, like you got go-go boots and you want to be taken to battlegrounds. Mm-hmm. You're the Tinkerbell of the administration. I mean, I just love that. So thank you for sharing that with us because it's important. How did that shape your values, and how does that translate? And how did it translate into the leader you are today? What's been that?
It wasn't only. When you study military strategy, you really have to understand the individual leaders who are involved with that strategy. I was fascinated by Roman history. And so I read everything you could possibly read about Julius Caesar. I read everything you could read about, different leaders at different points in times in history. And so if you think about leadership, let's use Julius Caesar as an example. Sure. He was a man of his troops, right? He lived with his troops. He went out with his troops. He knew his troops. And as you look through World War II history, we could look at Montgomery versus Patton, really different personalities. Very. And I look at speeches, and I actually do study speeches a lot. And so what is it that they said to inspire the nation? What did they say to inspire their troops? What did they say to inspire people to support them after a regime change, whatever it was that caused that regime change? And so that relationship between communications, influence, the characteristics that were required. I am very much of a hands-on leader. I walk the floors. I make sure I know everybody. I understand what's going on in their families, their people. And so for me, I did, tend to study those leaders who really had those personality traits, who really led by example, but also through a relationship with the people that they were serving.
Do you feel like that's still... there's enough of that? Do you feel like there's enough of that hands-on? Or do you feel like a lot of leaders today have gotten distant from it? Because in my experience, I'm finding I see both very differently. but they're both very strong. So we've got these dictatorial, authoritarian leaders and leaders who are trying to completely flatten the field and go, come talk to me. It's not, because I've always said the open door policy is nonsense. And here's why it's nonsense, because that barrier to them walking in is still there. It's actually, you've got to walk out of the office, not my door's
Yep.
always open. I'm actually not in the office. I'm at your desk is a different piece. Do you see it differently, or am I?
It's interesting. I ran a self-regulatory initiative for 16 food and beverage CEOs, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm working for 16 CEOs of the biggest, best known companies in the world: PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, General Mills, Smuckers, Bumblebee, all at the same time. And different leaders are different types of people. I will say Ken Powell, who was the CEO of General Mills, I think for almost 12 years, one of the longest serving CEOs. If you Google Ken Powell and in relationship to what his teams thought about him, the love and respect for his leadership in General Mills, off the charts, off the
Wow.
charts. They would do these employee surveys, and it was incredible the degree to which people admired Ken.
Mm-hmm.
Ken was a brilliant guy. I think he was a Harvard MBA, very, very smart person, almost professorial in his personality type. Yet he was a floor walker. He knew what was going on. He talked to the people. He came up through that industry. He cared about the people in that industry. Another person was JP Bilbray. JP Bilbray was CEO of Hershey for a period of time. He also ran a lot of their international operations. He spent time in Yemen. He was in the stores. I think people in CPG, they've had to go into those corner stores, right? The mom and pop stores. If you're in some country and it's out of somebody's garage or their living room or their little pop-up, once you've had to really understand the relationship at the most direct point with the consumer, and
Mm-hmm.
that group of people who actually in developing countries make up 60-70% of the entire marketplace, it
Wow.
makes you into a different kind of leader. And I'll never forget when I'd been featured in the Wall Street Journal, and and he's sitting there and he calls me up. He goes, okay, I'm sitting in Beijing and I'm having my breakfast, and I can't believe there you are, Lisa. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you.
Right.
And having that ability to communicate that relationship, I find to be just still existing. It's just different people.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's that one of the things that I am very big on is the humanization of leaders, and that you've got to be real. You got to be human. So that call from Beijing to say, I'm proud of you, is going to be a moment that becomes sort of imprinted in the heart and the soul and the mind of that person. And too often we get caught in the distraction and even the emergencies that we're facing, and we forget those people. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Now you've been, as we talked about in before, you've had a front row seat to some very major inflection points in history. I'm guessing those taught you some pretty powerful things about, because your book is called The Turnaround, and you've been there when things have turned around in not just in businesses, but in political arenas, even the Cold War. You were there at the time of Gorbachev and Reagan. So talk to us a little bit about those, your strongest learnings from those, and how that has led you to writing this book, The Turnaround.
Well, I was at the White House when Gorbachev came to visit Reagan, and for those of us who grew up in the Cold War and were strong Cold Warriors, that was a big moment when you walked into that White House
Huge.
building and you saw the hammer and sickle in your, flag hanging over your door, and then you walk down the hall and there comes some, Soviet military personnel. It was disconcerting. It was like, oh, I hope he knows what he's doing. I
Yeah.
hope he's on the right track.
Yep.
We hope he knows. And I think George Shultz just celebrated his 100th birthday. And you think about all that those men did to basically free a number of nations. And what's interesting with that is many years later, when I was the U.S. ambassador to the World's Fair, I would get, there were 200 countries that participate in the World's Fair. There are pavilions all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like being at Epcot. And every Polish delegation wanted to meet me. Why did they want to meet me? Because I'd worked for Ronald Reagan. And it didn't matter that I was, I was fairly junior on the Reagan team. I myself only met him a few times, but the fact that I'd worked for him. And
Sure.
what they appreciated is that he was so focused. And I think that's the thing I learned from Reagan, which is that he was focused on three primary issues, which were lowering taxes, deregulation, making things easier for businesses to function, and then ending the Cold War. And he did those three things, and we knew that focus. And I think that's what you're asking is, it's that ability to focus, and at inflection points, it's that ability to go farther than you've ever thought you could go before. And that's what we've seen during the pandemic, because there have been those people that said, this is a big inflection point. I can sit and just not move and hide and hope it gets over with. Or,
Mhm.
you know what? I'm going to take it better, further, and faster than I ever anticipated. And so at each one of those moments of great change, I've had the opportunity to see leaders like Andy Grove, like Ronald Reagan, like others really shift the world in a way that impacted almost every person on the planet.
Yeah, I've often said that, of course, Ronald Reagan is held up as the high prince of the Republican Party. It's like, oh, and I've often said, uh, I'm old enough to remember Reagan. I'm old enough to remember Reagan, Gorbachev, and Reagan's political wife, who was Margaret Thatcher. And Reagan had a lot of people who didn't like him, and a lot of things he pushed for that a lot of people didn't like. And he certainly wasn't going down as the greatest president who ever lived. He certainly wasn't going down even as the greatest Republican president. But ending the Cold War was it. I mean, I remember, and please understand that I'm in no way minimizing how much more massive that was for Gorbachev. I can't even imagine how difficult it was for Gorbachev. But I remember watching those things and seeing that, and I don't know that somebody who wasn't like Ronnie, who I didn't economically agree with at all, I don't know that somebody else could have done what he did in that context. That's what you're saying about that. You talked about earlier about that 60-40 or 80-20 back in the day, is like, this is really important. Can I put my, shit on the side and go, this really matters, and I'm going to get behind this because it matters. And I think that is a key point that we're missing in politics today, is we don't say, what's the bigger issue that I can get behind? I don't agree with that. I don't even agree with this, but this is so important that I've got to get behind it. And I see the bipartisanship of that, and I see a sort of bipartisanship inside of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party within themselves around the same things. So there are parts of the left that will not support AOC, and AOC won't support. So it's like, come on. And and then you've got Trump and his thing, and Republicans who have also pulled away, and you've got the Lincoln Project. And it's like, we've got to decide what's the most important and go for that. Where does that unification come? And it seems to me that has been the pull through, the through line in your work, in your career, in everything you've done, everything I read about you, because I did a little bit of research before we spoke, and I just like, this through line has been there. So when I come to that, I of course come to, okay, you've written this book, The Turnaround, which I want to definitely let people know about, but you're also the CEO of FAIR. And FAIR seems like a odd choice for, well, certainly for an aspiring leader. Yeah, and of course, you're not an aspiring leader. You're already there. So tell us a little bit about being the CEO of FAIR, and tell our audience a little bit about what FAIR is, if you could, please.
Sure. So as you noted earlier, FAIR is the largest NGO dealing with life-threatening food allergies. We are the largest funder of research in the world. We're the only primary funder of research, and we have 50 clinical networks around the United States. It was interesting. FAIR went through a change in 2012, and I was doing another job. I get a phone call from a headhunter. There's been a merger of these two organizations, and everybody thinks you'd be great. And I said, well, that's good because I have this other job, but thanks very much. Here are 3 names. Go call them. 2014, I get a second phone call from another headhunter. Hi, I'm calling about this job. And she describes it. I go, God, I swear I just talked to somebody about that. And she goes,
just say no to that?
And, right. She goes, well, the person that was hired 14 months ago didn't work out. And so the board has a whole other idea and they want to talk to you about it. And I said, well, I'm in the middle. I was in the middle of a big announcement that had to do with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and Michelle Obama. And I said, I can't do it right now. And so in 2018, I get a third phone call. And I tell you, it was like it was biblical or something, and they said, would you come in and talk? And the person who had called me is a very good friend of mine that I worked with in the Reagan White House, a guy by the name of Charlie Ingersoll, who's a senior partner at Korn Ferry. And he goes, Lisa, there's just something here. He said, you've got to talk to these people. He goes, I just feel like this could be really big, but it's not. In fact, it's failing. And he said they want somebody who can think big. And I came in and I met this board, and I'd gone through a lot of discussions with different boards and, walked away going, can't work with those people. Nope, not good, not going to happen. In fact, I'd had people say at the beginning of the interview, we don't want to change as much as you're going to change us. And I'm thinking, well, why in the heck do you have me sitting here? So I walk in and these people said, we really need to change. We've got to tell you, we think that this is a growing issue. We think it's going to be a very big issue in the United States, but for some reason, we haven't been able to make it work. Well, there is nothing I like more than a challenge. I like taking something that nobody knows about and making it into the biggest table topic that everybody's talking about. And what I will tell you through those, we restructured by 83%. We were in the red the day I joined, raised $85 million in 2 years. And 74 of that we actually raised in the first 18 months because we sold people on a strategic plan. And we said, this is what the world should look like. And I laid a bet that the community that we needed to represent was much bigger than the 32 million Americans with life-threatening food allergies. And so I talked to McKinsey and I said, can you do this research? The food allergy dad, one of the top guys at McKinsey, he goes, what can I do for you? And I had my answer. It's like waiting for him to ask. I said, I want to do research because I think we're underestimating the impact of this issue. So we did research with McKinsey, and what it showed is that 1 in 4 Americans do not buy products that have the top 9 allergens in them. 1 out of 4 Americans, 85 million Americans, or 330 million Americans in the United States. And what we are doing is saying, you know what, our message and yes, we're representing people that have to carry an epinephrine auto-injector. I can't even say it. But we're the place you come when your food makes you sick. And if you think about it, people listening, how many people have celiacs? How many women have dairy intolerances older in life? How many people are getting alpha-gal? So you start going through, and what's interesting, it's all driven by the same top 9 allergens. They're all proteins, and there's something about these proteins, and there's something about what's going on that's creating a physical reaction in a very severe way to people's food. So I believe we're sitting on the cusp of being able to resolve something that actually impacts 1 in 4 Americans. And so we've grown our numbers. We have actually identified that there are some steps we can take with babies. 4 million babies are born a year, and that there's actually work we can do to prevent them from developing these allergens, from developing these intolerances by educating their immune system. So when I joined FAIR, it was 32 million Americans. Well, right now we're talking about 85 million Americans, 4 million babies every single year, and we've expanded globally. So we took it from being this tiny little NGO into being a fairly distinct and large player on the international scene.
So what is the purpose of FAIR? Is it to raise, to the public? Is it to simply raise awareness at a public level?
It is to end food allergies, however that comes about. And that can be through creating therapies, through diagnostics that allow us to evaluate them, or preventing the rise of the disease. And so we are focused on all three of those. But again, if we focus on the fact that for some reason proteins are causing people to become sick from the food they're eating, and it's happening and it's an exponential rate by which it's growing. In fact, one of our goals had been to make food allergies famous, and then pandemic happened, and so COVID became famous, but we're still working on that goal. But what we know is that it is a rising number, and the question is why. And so that's our goal, is to find out the basic reason, why is this happening, and what can we do to drive money towards fixing the problem.
So I want to dive in a little bit on that, because I think I personally think it's a really important subject, and really reason I want to bring it up here, because as you are listening to this or watching this, you're a leader in some capacity. But one of the things I always like to say is, leadership starts at home. You're a leader in your own home in some way, shape, or form. You're a leader in your own community in some way, shape, or form. And there's a pretty good chance that you or somebody is suffering some kind of food allergic reaction. The problem with it is, and this is what I want to come back at you, Lisa, is the problem with it is it's got a hypochondriac sort of mantle to it. You're just being too fussy. And I know, because I do have food allergies, it's not true. I've done the scientific research. I've done all those things. And I'm not talking about having an allergy test, because most of those are crappy anyway. They don't really work, and they certainly don't tell you anything. For instance, in case you're interested to know, and I'm happy if you've got any other input on this, Lisa, I remember going, I'm pretty sure I'm allergic to wheat. So I went for the wheat allergy. Oh, no, you're not allergic to wheat. And I said, well, here's the thing. I've done some research. And they go, what? And I said, your allergy test is for a wheat that existed in 1956. It doesn't exist anymore. So you're testing to see if I'm allergic to a wheat that is not on the market, that I certainly didn't consume. So of course I'm not allergic to that. Why hasn't it been updated? And they're like, we didn't know that. Yeah, you're a food allergist, and I know that. So it's almost like there's so many disconnects.
Right.
Are you seeing that too?
Well, again, here's the organization, the primary organization doing research in the category, going through 3 CEO changes in a very short period of time. Right. And so there was no coordinated effort. There was no 5-year strategic business plan on what needed to happen to solve the problem. And we put that plan together. And then what we did is we did what was called a landscape document, where we looked at all the different innovations going on in the marketplace, and where they would play out, when their clinical trials would happen, and where the relationship was between them. And then we went to donors, and we went to doctors, and we said, again, identify the top things that we need to fix. Well, guess what? There's really no good diagnostic for life-threatening food allergies.
No.
And so one of the things that we'll be announcing in January is a very large scale effort. In fact, anyone listening needs to check with our website in January, because we will be putting into play an extremely big initiative to get people to invest in a diagnostic. Mm-hmm. And right now, the only diagnostic is called the Oral Food Challenge. You can do blood tests, but the true diagnostic is you take a child who's suffered anaphylaxis, so they already have PTSD, they've been in the hospital before, and you feed them the allergen until they react. That's barbaric. That's how we figure out whether or not somebody has a food allergy, is you just keep feeding the food.
Let's see what your pain tolerance is by punishing you.
Right.
I think I'll pass on that test.
It's crazy. And one of our board members, his child was brought back to life with 6 EpiPens. We're talking about a disease that affects 32 million people, and then aspects of the disease, gut health, that affects 85 million people. And we don't have a way to figure out what's wrong with you. That's crazy. And so that's been job one for us. It's one reason we've been raising all this money, is we are extremely focused on what are the biggest answers, what are the biggest things that we need to do. Until last year, there was no therapy in the marketplace, so there was no treatment.
On the other side of that, where when I first read about you and I read about the work you're doing with FAIR, and I went on and looked at FAIR, and one of the things that was really interesting to me is the economics, because I'm old enough to remember that in the late 80s, watching documentaries like I did about genetically modified food. I'm feeling very excited, positively excited about the possibility of being able to grow food in the deserts of Israel or wherever it might be, and thinking, this is going to be wonderful. It's going to feed the hungry. And now I see that GMO foods have had a lot of negative effects on a lot of people in all kinds of ways, including the fact that our gut biome is a mess. Most of us, it's pretty messy. And, we're having reactions because of a gut biome issue. So the reason I bring it up is because you have been at the top levels of leadership. You've been at the top levels of business. You know about understanding about that profit margin, that line thing, and the moral, ethical versus the profitable. And I'm wondering about, here you are running a not-for-profit, trying to make a positive difference with a business background, going to be pushing up against people who are saying, we want our profits, but part of how we make our profits is we make things cheaper by adding a chemical that upsets the gut biome and creates allergic reactions.
Well, I've always been able to bring industry to the table, and we've had a great relationship with CPG, with ag, and with the pharma biotech world. I think everybody wants to solve the problem. I mean, what we've discovered is in our prevention category that we've been able to get the commodities to actually fund a project. They've never funded a project in the food allergy space except beyond, just basic research. And so we've brought them into this process. And now we have this very collaborative effort on an area where we can work together, which is how do we introduce these proteins into your child's diet in a way that the immune system learns how to integrate those proteins? How does the immune system get trained? And that is a big problem that we have right now. In 1998, we had some doctors that went and told people, never eat these proteins, don't eat these allergens. Well, it was the wrong thing to tell people.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, we never trained their bodies to adjust to these foods. And that's one reason, too, that we actually think that there could be this rise in sesame, is that it is an ingredient that wasn't a part of every American's diet. But about 10 years ago, I was at one of the meetings where they talked about it with the top chefs. They said, oh, you look at the hot new ingredients coming out over the next 10 years. And sesame was one of those ingredients. Well, now we're all eating hummus and we're eating all these other foods. So I think it's a matter of a number of things. One is we told people not to eat things. Secondarily is that we introduce new things into diets where bodies haven't built up a tolerance to that food. And then, as you say, there are other stressors that are going on. The question is what's causing the stressors. And I think that what I've discovered is people, particularly in food science, they don't want to be responsible for someone getting sick. They really don't. I know they have to sell products, but the reality is they don't wake up every morning going, well, how can we kill your children today? That's not their job. Their job is, how do we feed a population? And so we identify places where we can work together, and we focus on where we can work together.
And that seems in many ways to be the theme of your book, The Turnaround, because in the book, you're teaching readers how to make turnarounds happen smoothly, successfully, and with discipline and certainly with diplomacy. What are we missing? Because we seem to be missing a bit on that. What are we missing?
Well, what I tell people is, and we've all heard this term, wave your magic wand. Well, when I tell people, wave your magic wand, if you're unhappy with where you are today, what do you want it to look like? But when you imagine what you want it to look like, you can't imagine it leaving out other people that exist. I think that is one of the things we miss today, is that it's just this minor detail, which is in that future, those other people are going to be there too, unless you get rid of them. And we're not advocating for that. No. So then your requirement is, if you truly believe that the vision that you're imagining in the future, something that's more innovative, that's more directed on the consumer, that's going to help the patient out the most, and other people aren't in agreement with you, then you got to bring them along. And that's one of the big issues that I talk about. I speak a lot about, which is you need to bring people on the journey with you. And they're not going to be with you right away. I can't begin to tell you in every situation that I have had, and I've been brought in to turn around things in government, I've been brought around to turn things in companies. I have had people initially despise me. Oh, just hate me. I was the most horrible person. But there's that persistent respect of sitting down with them going, okay, don't agree with me. Explain to me why. Explain to me what it is that you want to see happen. All right, so if I do it this way and this way and this way, can you move forward with me? And I've had a situation when I was at the State Department. I had a situation where I was truly the most maligned individual, I believe, when I was brought into a job, that same group of people were calling the White House 2 years later and saying, hey, there's another job open here at the State Department. We think Lisa should be the one to go into that job. And I've had that many, many times. It's because I'm politely persistent, but I keep coming back with process. All right, if we don't do it this way, if we do it that way, how do you feel about that? Okay, let's look at the unintended consequences. Does it hurt this thing that you want to do? Does it hurt that thing? But they have to be in your future. And what you want is you want to shift everybody up a level. You want to shift everybody to the place that it's a higher performance for the environment in which you're operating.
And I agree with that. But we both know that people get their heels dug in.
Yeah, but I can be picky.
Yeah, obviously you're very persuasive. But what I'm wondering is there a simple, it's not simple, it's never simple, but is there a piece of guidance around working with, particularly with that stubborn heels in sort of person?
So when I told you all that I had been appointed by President Bush to this advisory committee around tailhook, and obviously you had two groups of people. The Republicans were very strong military, never going to question a general. They can't be wrong. And we were going to have the Democrats, a lot of whom came from EEO backgrounds, employment, equal opportunity backgrounds. And they were questioning whether or not there were aspects of the military that should be discontinued. And everyone was fighting a lot. And so I brought in the Baldridge Ward team and I said, guys, I was vice chairman at the time. I go, let me just put forward a process, see if you'll live with it. And so what we said is we all had to, as part of our job, visit military bases around the world. We developed a questionnaire. We all agreed. We were all going to ask the military personnel, all the ranks, men, women, all ages, all ranks, the same questions. We were basically doing a consumer research project.
Right.
And the agreement was that we would write down what they told us without editorializing, and then we would come back in a room and we would put up what they told us around the room. And so everybody goes off, 52 military bases around the world. We all have our little sheets. I interviewed 1,000 people, Korea and, Turkey and England. And people stuck with the program. People were very good about just writing down what they heard. And once you put that down, and then as you do in any case, you just start grouping it, right? We heard this, we heard this. Well, that's pretty common to what we heard over here. And all of a sudden, what it reveals is what the people you're trying to help actually care about. And you're using the data that you collected, listening to the voice of the individual that's impacted by the thing that you're trying to fix. And you're showing how that information folds out, and then you're placing bets. You're saying, okay, we now get to rank and rate. We've grouped it in. We've had all these interviews, grouped it into like 5 different buckets. Based on what you heard, here are your 5 stickies. I had generals and admirals, and I had people that would sleep at the White House because they were best friends with the president. They all had their little 5 stickies, and you can put all 5 stickies up on one thing, or you can put them on other things. Bottom line is we've discovered that all the assumptions we had about what impacted these military people was not the issues that they cared about. And speaking with facts, it's one thing I learned from Craig Barrett at Intel. In what we've learned in the area with food allergies, you need to listen to the voice of the patient. You can have all the assumptions in the world, but the reality is go talk to people. Go talk to people, and then be willing to actually convey what they told you, not what you wanted them to tell you, but what they told you. And then rank and rate what you're going to do based on what they have said is the biggest barrier to their being successful in their life, in their disease, in their work, whatever it is.
You're obviously doing really great work, Lisa, and I really appreciate it, especially as somebody who has food allergies. But I appreciate you as a leader and what you've done. We are coming close to the end of the show, and I would actually love to carry on. However, because we're at the end of the show, there's a couple of things I'd like to do. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to have people find out more about you, about FAIR, about your book, about all those kinds of things and how they can do that. But I always like to say, what is one thing you would put forward? Because I believe information is worth the hole in the donut. Transformation comes from application. So what's the one piece of applicable, practical guidance you would give to our listeners, our viewers, to have them integrate what it is you've said today, what it is you've shared?
One thing?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay,
One or two.
Speak with facts.
Speak with facts.
We have a lot of argument going on in the world. Sometimes it helps to have the facts. Facts can help guide decisions. Data is the circuit breaker in the regulatory world. You need the facts and you need the data, and that's probably the most important thing that you can bring into a conversation to help move the room to the place you want them to go.
So before we finish, now I'm going to come back, which is, you may have noticed that people are creating their own facts these days.
They are.
Meaning that they, I said recently that the one of the great challenges we're facing is that conspiracy is fact and fact is conspiracy. So how would you work with that as an issue, which has become a very real issue these days?
That's where we got into the fact that as we collected the information from those individuals, from those soldiers, and today as I collect information from patients, is you have to have a commitment that you are going to not interpret the information. You're not going to editorialize on the information. You are going to convey the information in exactly the way it was provided to you. And it's the respect for the individual that you have told everyone you want to help. The only way you can demonstrate respect for them is to actually listen to exactly what they're saying and being willing to represent their voice in the room, not your voice, not your opinion, but their voice.
I love it. Because really, I mean, what you're saying, what I've heard as sort of themes here is not only curiosity, but transparency and not interpretation. And I love that. Thank you so much. Listen, I have loved our conversation. Thank you for taking the time. I know you're a busy lady with a lot of things on your platter. Please, we would really be grateful if you would share with our audience where they can find out more about you, your resources, FAIR, your book, etc.
So to find out more about me, you can go to lisagable.com. And to find out more about FAIR, you can go to foodallergy.org. And we're also on digital. We're on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. We have a Living Teal channel, lots of really fun ways for you to get the information you need if you have a life-threatening food allergy or food intolerance.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you to Lisa Gable. And again, you can find out more about her at lisagable.com and foodallergy.org. We'll post those, of course, into the show notes. And you can hang out with other conscious leaders, and you can chat about this episode that you've been listening to or any of our past episodes inside of our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. We are very grateful to our guest today for all the wonderful information that's been shared here. And I want to remind you that it doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees, your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, then you're only working at a fraction of your capability. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or a leadership strategist or an executive advisor for yourself or your organization, simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. Because unified meaning, or as we like to call it, finding your dragonfire, is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness in all individuals and in the companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about what it will take for you to turn things around in a way that's not only diplomatic and compassionate and empathetic, but in a way that speaks and argues with facts, not presumptions, not interpretations, but the facts that you are actually listening and you care. I'm Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragon fire to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.